Hi, everybody. I'm Steve Paikin, and for 19 years, I hosted a program called The Agenda on TVO. And these days, I'm keeping the conversation going with a new show I've created called The Paikin Podcast, which is available on that YouTube thing and all those other platforms where you find your podcasts. Happy to be back as your guest host for another episode of Curious Public's Comms in Question. The last time we did this, we focused on what experts called the hinge moment in our history that we seem to be at right now. Today, it's the next chapter in that story. Little background here. Just last month, Prime Minister Mark Carney announced the first projects that are going to be reviewed under the new Major Projects Office, part of his call to build, baby, build in areas such as housing, clean energy, and infrastructure. There are, of course, massive opportunities for business and communities, but they also come with complex partnerships, high public expectations, and scrutiny over how these projects can take shape. Yes, these projects need to be built well, but they also need to be understood and supported. They need public trust and a story that connects what's being built to why it matters. Communications matter. So today we are asking, what does it take to radically change the way we build? And how do we tell and sell that story to the public? Let's find out. We've got some great guests here today, starting with Geoff Smith. He is executive chair at EllisDon, where he reshaped the company through new approaches in smart buildings, energy management, and sustainable construction, growing it into a $7 billion global leader. Geoff is widely respected for his integrity and community leadership, and I know this because Geoff's dad and my dad did business together, and I remember my dad speaking so highly, Geoff, about you and your dad. So it's great to see you today.
Very kind of you and nice to be here.
Jennifer Vandenvalk is here. She's Senior Vice President of Communications and Public Affairs at the Toronto Region Board of Trade. Jennifer's a passionate city builder who's led communications for some of Canada's biggest projects, including Ontario's $70 billion transit expansion. Jennifer, great to see you today.
Great to see you, Steve. Thank you.
Thank you. Michael Fox is from Weenusk First Nation and is the president and CEO of Indigenous and Community Engagement, one of Canada's leading national Indigenous-owned firms. Michael transforms how industry, government, and Indigenous communities collaborate on major infrastructure and resource projects. He brings experience in partnership, negotiation, and reconciliation. Michael Miigwech, great to see you. Thank you for being here.
You, Miigwech.
And Alan Findlay is here. He's executive consultant and strategist with our host company, Curious Public. He's also principal of his own firm, Findlay et al. Storytelling is at the heart of Alan's work. He's a veteran communicator with 25 years experience, leading teams at Infrastructure Ontario and the Ontario Energy Board, keeping large projects credible, clear, and connected to the public. Alan, good to see you.
Great to see you, Steve. Thanks for being there.
I'm happy to do this. Now, for those of you watching, please feel free to put some questions in the chat forum, and we will sprinkle those throughout our discussion as they come in. And I guess I should say one more thing before we get into the discussion. Normally, I dress more appropriately and businesslike for the occasion. But folks, we can't be taking any chances these days. There's something very important happening tomorrow night. And I got my lucky Blue Jay shirt on, okay? This I wore I'm not sure I've worn this in 32 years. I got this when the Jays won their last World Series in '93, and we can't leave anything to chance. So, okay, I've got the lucky t-shirt on, and away we go. Geoff, starting with you. During the election campaign, the Prime Minister was fond of saying, quote, "We are a country of builders." And he pointed to big projects like we've done in the past, the St. Lawrence Seaway, the railways, and so on. I just want to start by asking you whether you think Canadians still see themselves as builders.
And the answer, Steve and everybody, great to be here. We build great baseball teams, apparently. But we should think of ourselves as great builders because we are great builders. And I think it's partly a comms issue. So Mark Carney says, oh, look at the Seaway, look at the railways. We did this 100 years ago. Let's look back 3 or 4 or 5, 10, 20 years. We've been building infrastructure in this country. Infrastructure Ontario has been doing it. Infrastructure BC, right across the country, almost all the time, virtually all the time, on time and on budget. People have ignored the waterfront Toronto project where the Portlands has been rebuilt. Tons of new land has been created. The Don River has been redirected. These are Canadian companies doing great buildings. Canadian companies, and I'm talking about, it pains me to say it, not just EllisDon, but our competitors, PCL, Pomerleau, Aecon, and others, great engineering firms like Hatch and Atkins Realis. Mattamy Homes is one of the biggest home builders in North America. When Canadians go out into the world and compete, we do well. I'm going to boast a little bit because it's a comms show and say when they come here, not so well. We're able to handle the world. So Canadians are great builders. We just have to be more proud of ourselves and have more
Geoff,
confidence in ourselves.
I'd put one more building on that list, Geoff, and that might be the one that your dad and my dad worked on together. Do you want to tell everybody what that one was?
So 30 odd years ago, 40, excuse me, Toronto welcomed Skydome to its skyline. I, of course, still call it Skydome. You get banned at EllisDon if you call it anything else. It was built, shovel hitting the ground to opening day in 30 months. And there was actually a water treatment plant operating in the middle of the site on day one. So we had to take that down, build another one, get it done. There is no question that Canadians can build. We don't need to radically change the way we're building. We need to do certain things. We'll talk about it. But there's nothing wrong with this country's building ability. Great firms like Steve's dad's firm and my dad's firm.
Well, for the record, I think my dad's business was a sub for your dad, and my dad's rebars in that building, which your dad built so beautifully. So there we go.
Perfect.
Jennifer, come on in here. You're all in on the business of one way or another telling the kinds of building stories that are legendary. So just give us some sense about how you tell the story of a building success.
There are so many ways to tell the story, but I can tell you one thing for sure is that you have to tell the story. And I tell this story a lot, which is that very early in my communications career, I had an engagement with a journalist talking about how the great stories that came out of the province of Ontario and the great work that the OPS does across all of the ministries. And the journalist just looked at me and he said, I don't cover planes that land. So when it comes to these massive, incredible projects that we're about to invest in, we have to be responsible for telling the story about the planes that land, because they will, as Geoff said. We're great builders and we can be great planners too. But that really means building your strategic communications right into your communications, your strategic project plan. It's not an add-on. It's not a press release you wave around at the end of the day. It really is thinking about the entire project life cycle of these massive investments that we're making. And also remembering that your storytelling in year one, the planning design phase, is going to look really different than your storytelling when you start to get on the ground. You're engaging communities, you're dealing with stakeholders, you're pulling up trees, you're impacting communities and people in their daily life. And so you're going to have to shift your storytelling and make sure that it's meaningful. And then you've got the storytelling that needs to happen on the inside out, which often gets forgotten as well, which is all of those project partners. This is, when you're building major infrastructure and you're building cities, you have a lot of people who are part of that team. And it's not just your internal team, it's all of your partners, it's all of the planning, it's the design, the constructors, and it's all the people on the ground. So everyone has to be part of that storytelling.
Alan, I gather there is an old saying in construction that what you want to do is build cheap, build good, and build fast, but you can probably only have two of those things. Which two should we want?
I would settle for just one of those on my kitchen demo, Steve. So, I think you can have all three, but they're all relative terms, right? Like, I think how cheap, what is good, how fast is fast. This is where early and clear communications is so important, because you have that opportunity to set that context and you set the frame and help people understand that, too often the problem is what people are told at the beginning of the project and what they see or they don't see as things progress. And so by engaging people in that planning process, let them better see if they want the different parts of the project. Bring them into it. That's gonna serve you well when things do go sideways, and they better understand what's going on. A good example, I think, if you look at a tunnel, say it's whether it's for Niagara's energy tunnel or subway, everything's going down on below. And until you get down there, you're not really going to know what's happening. So you can say it's going to take you 18 months, but if you hit rock that you didn't know was there, suddenly you're going a meter or two a day rather than uh, or an hour rather than a meter or two a day. All of those things kind of hit it. If you're talking about that more regularly in that drumbeat, I think that really helps people understand and contextualize, like what is late, why is it late, those sorts of things. I think that's where that drumbeat of communications, and as Jen was saying, he was talking about all the different parts of it. That's where it's so important, and build that trust. Because I think if you're explaining it after the complications, then it just sounds like an excuse, and people don't feel like they really understand it. You don't have that trust.
Jennifer, you want in on that?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly it, Al. And I think the thing that is often forgotten, you want cheap, you want goods, you want fast. Well, you can't afford not to communicate from the get-go, because it's not going to get cheaper when you have to redo things. It's not going to get faster when you have to pause to deal with issues across all of your stakeholders in your communities and the powers that be, the owners that are investing in and paying for this project, when you have to backtrack and tell them what went wrong. And it's not going to get faster, that's for sure. I read something the other day that poor communication is a factor that can put up to 10% of your project value at risk. And that's all sorts of communications. And when you're talking about mega projects, that's like hundreds of millions of dollars per project. So bad communications or lack of, that's expensive.
Right.
Yeah,
Michael Fox, we're really delighted that you could join us here today, because the Indigenous angle on what we're talking about today is imperative. And I'll just start with a quote here. The CEO of Hydro One said a few months ago in a speech that, yes, Canadians quickly built a lot of major infrastructure in the past, but we did it by ignoring Indigenous treaties and rights. So the question becomes, can we still build relatively quickly while respecting Indigenous rights at the same time? What say you?
I would say absolutely, but only if we redefine what speed really means. Fast doesn't mean rushed. It means building projects right the first time, on a foundation of trust, shared ownership, and legal certainty. A lot of people view Indigenous rights as an obstacle rather than, you know, a vehicle by which you can actually exercise those rights to self-determination, rights to economic self-reliance, the right to development, other types of rights that's been expressed through the different trends that we see across Canada. So I'm really glad you mentioned the Hydro One, because I think they're kind of leading the way in Ontario around Indigenous ownership. Right now, anything over 100, was it $100 million? They're offering, equal partnership in any transmission line built in Ontario for Indigenous equity. So I think the key is building relationship, building capacity, building consensus. And when you got those together with all the enabling mechanisms you see today, both in Ontario and the federal level, such like the capacity to participate in those projects and the process, resource revenue sharing, as well as Indigenous loan guarantees, that enables communities to be part of the project directly versus on the sideline.
Let me do a quick follow-up with you. How well or poorly do you think both the federal and provincial, let's just say Ontario governments, but we could ask this question of every province in the country, how well are they doing at the moment at establishing that consensus with Indigenous communities so that building can take place?
I think it's mixed reviews across different jurisdictions. I think there's ones that are fully committed to economic reconciliation in every sector in their province, and there's others that are just catching up and learning from lessons in other provinces. I'm in Ontario. I seen it the first time with the loan guarantee through the Ontario Finance Authority and the loan guarantee around the hydro projects when the Green Energy Act rolled out, that allowed Indigenous participation in hydro projects for the first time in Ontario. That was back in 2010-11. Now you see Indigenous loan guarantees by the federal government with this new prime minister that committed from $5 billion during the campaign to $10 billion. Ontario's rolled out their Indigenous loan guarantee $3 billion. So again, the enabling mechanisms and the enabling frameworks that are out there, way more robust than it was 20 years ago.
Gotcha. Geoff, I want to ask you about quality. Dawn Farrell is the head of Canada's new Major Projects Office. She's not a household name yet, despite the fact that she's had a very successful career. But I guess I want to ask whether you think it's important that the quality of work, the quality of the story, does the CEO need to be sort of front and center and visible and available in order to get the word out on a project?
I think the CEO needs to be front and center at the beginning, talking to the community, talking to their clients. It's one conversation, of course, talking frankly to their staff. After that, it gets a little more complicated. If the news is bad, if one of Dawn's projects are going bad, she's terrific, by the way, then she needs to be the one out front, in my view. If the news is good, and there's times to celebrate, milestones to celebrate, Dawn, get out of the way. Let the people on the front lines announce the news. Let them have the fun. Another key part of projects, big and small, around communications is small news, community comms, inside a neighborhood. Listen, homeowners, we're going to be blocking your street next week, or store owners on Thursday all day because we're taking a crane down and we're doing something. Just letting you know. Let the people on the site do that comms, because they build up the relationships with the local people. And then after that, they can all talk. They get to know one another as human beings. So there's a time and a place for CEO communication, for mid-level communication, and for direct on-site communication. I'm sure this is one of the things that the five of us would agree on. As long as the story is always honest, as long as right from the CEO on down, there's a culture of honesty and candor, clarity, I guess I should say, then you don't need to worry about other people in your company doing the communications, because you're all singing from the same hymn book anyway. So get the values and the principles right, and let everybody talk. But if there's bad news, Michael McCain set the gold standard for this, as I'm sure we all know. No, the CEO gets out. The CEO shows the courage. The CEO stands up for the company, or admits the downfall, or does whatever needs to be done in that moment. Other than that, you can share the load.
Can I do a brief follow-up with you on this? Maybe give us a concrete example from your career of where you felt you needed to be front and center on something.
So about 2 years ago, listen, everybody looks at the Eglinton LRT. It's a failed project. Let's just get that off the table. It doesn't mean we're terrible builders. Doesn't mean Canada doesn't know how to build. But and transit projects across North America have been universal failures. We're not the only ones. But when a project goes sour like that, everybody starts talking, and unless there's clear communications, then the rumors are always worse than the truth. So we decided in our consortium, frankly, to go around the contract a little bit, to go into the Toronto Star, take the Toronto Star reporter on a ride on the LRT. This is a couple of years ago now, and show the public, hey, it's not so bad. It's a line that we're all going to be proud of. Don't everybody calm down. I know it's still not running, but everybody calm down. But the important part of that comms, maybe the most important part, is we had 200 people on that site, maybe 300 or 400. They're all getting beaten up. They see themselves getting criticized in the media. Their neighbors and friends are saying, what the hell is going on at Eglinton? What are you guys doing over there? Well, when the CEO gets up and says, hey, it's okay, and these are great people, and they're working hard, and we're doing a good job, then it relates directly to your point. I think that has a direct impact on the quality of the work, because it has a direct impact on the morale of the people. It gives them a story to tell, and they can say, hey, the leader has my back here. I'm good to go. I'll get up tomorrow and go to work with a little more pride. So sometimes external comms is as much about internal comms as it is about external comms. As everybody has here said, it's all critically important, and you can't do too much of it.
Jennifer, let me get your advice on that. At what point, if you are offering the advice to the CEO, do you say to that CEO, I need you front and center on this thing right now?
I've said it before. We've certainly had situations, back when we were launching they really starting to get shovels in the ground on the subway program, on Ontario subway program in the middle of COVID. We had to shift all of our engagement and community engagement from in person to online. That was really tough. And, our CEO at the time showed up at a lot of these first meetings, and it was really, really important to those communities and those stakeholders that we had the CEO present and willing to take that time with some of these communities. And I think that really helped. And those were hard days. We had a lot of pushback, and we couldn't have that on the ground communications and relationship building. It's very difficult to do it when your community offices are closed and the door knocking that used to happen couldn't happen, or it happened with a mask on. It was just such a different experience. But having the head and that authority there helps to build that trust. And then it also helps to, empower the people who are then going to be more of the day-to-day communicators to get involved. But, we had some, especially the Ontario line, for example, there were a lot of trip ups and a lot of communities that weren't happened when we first started going out and talking about the Ontario line. And so having that senior presence was really important, and also bringing different voices to the table. So not just the CEO, but also having someone with more of a technical background who can answer more technical questions. And even though the communications is absolutely important, it can't just be the communicators all the time, or else people and communities will feel as though they're being messaged. So you need all your partners by your side.
And when you say it makes a difference, it makes a difference to whom?
I think it makes a difference to the communities, to the stakeholders, to often a community meeting. It isn't just the people that live in a neighborhood or the BIAs that are working across town. Is of course a lot of businesses that were impacted, but also the elected officials who have to be part of your champion group. Whether it's a city councillor or a provincial representative, they're there to represent their constituency. And when they see that senior leadership is paying attention and engaged, it helps them to help you.
Steve, can I jump in there real quick?
Please.
Just another thing to add to, I think, what Geoff and Jennifer were talking about is those different roles of the communication. There is a really important role for those senior level CEOs or ministers where they're delivering that narrative that's at the higher level. And that's so important because that's the North Star that all of the communicators beneath them need help on. So if you're going through the day-to-day and dealing with angry residents, it's so helpful for them to have that narrative constantly being reminded of, like, this is why this project's so important. This is what it's going to accomplish. They can't deliver that as effectively as a minister or a CEO. So having that constant availability and being regular with that in good times and bad, but having that is really helpful for the people who are really in the trenches day to day and trying to engage with the communities.
Alan, can I do a follow with you on that, in as much as I'm looking for you to tell some tales out of school here. I want to know of a project that maybe you were advising on or you were working on, and it was right on the line. This thing could have turned south really badly, but we exercised some sort of mature and professional communications on it. We managed to get people back on side, and instead the thing didn't turn into a boondoggle, didn't turn into bad communications. It actually worked out well. Can you give me something on that?
Yeah, sure. I think a good one was the New Toronto Courthouse. That one was, if you'll remember, when we started to build that, you had a parking lot that was basically just asphalt. When you peeled it off, they found that it was a treasure trove of archaeological findings because it was in the old ward, and so it had history from the 19th century, all sorts of really fascinating things. There's that keenness from the project that they really want to keep it going. But when you find something like that, then there's a competing interest in terms of, like, how are you going to manage that and manage the communities that are so interested and so invested in preserving that history and maintaining it, while all the while keeping the project going forward. And I think by really seeing that bigger picture, all of the leadership involved, the project company, the government, they built some good alliances and found a solution on a working group that helped preserve those artifacts and find value out of them. and embed it into the project itself so that you can go to the courthouse and see some of what was found there. And rather than it being seen as a challenge or an obstacle, it became part of the project. And that was so important in the success of the project overall. And that was one where I think I think in many cases, you could have just tried to plow through and take your hits for being criticized for going too quickly. But I think the value of taking your time, building those partnerships, and embedding it into the project really made the project more successful overall.
Jennifer, I should get your sort of public relations expertise on that one as well. You know, the initial stories about that, you know, new billion-dollar, very impressive but very controversial new courthouse right near Toronto City Hall. The initial kind of spasm of articles, for example, in the popular daily press, were really quite negative. And I guess I wonder, do you think through storytelling, through improved communications, they've turned that around to the point where it's not seen as such a bad news story anymore?
Yeah, I think so. And it's often where things start to run out of control and things are negative at the beginning, but that consistent, persistent storytelling and probably bringing some of that media and getting them more involved also really helps. So, you know, that proactively reaching out to media and helping them to tell the story as well. There were days at Metrolinx when best case scenario was we neutralized a story. We actually had the opportunity to have a quote in that article, and we weren't able to completely pivot it. But having those strong relationships with media all the way along, and we had some fantastic media personalities at Metrolinx who had great relationships with media, does really help. And I'd say that that's probably what's happened there.
Got it. Michael, if you had the Prime Minister on this Zoom right now and you wanted to give him some advice on his expression, build, baby, build, what would you tell him?
Good question. I think I think sort of explain the trend line in Canada. You know, right now we have Indigenous-led environmental assessments, we have Indigenous-led projects, Indigenous-led economies. We're talking about economic corridors, energy corridors in Canada, and that's always in the context of you know, Section 35 in the Constitution, as well as the layered context of UNDRIP, FPIC, missing and murdered Indigenous women, etc. So you know, also the evolution in my own lifetime where there was no inclusion of Indigenous people in any major undertaking in Canada, where I saw, you know, from going from participation to partnerships to becoming proponents of projects. And so that whole idea of, you know, Indigenous peoples are victims of development, they're actually becoming agents of development. And that to take the lessons of those proponents today, you know, and what is the secret sauce that made communities to move their thinking around economic inclusion in Canada, to take you know, a page out of their playbook around all the different Indigenous proponents.
Does there have to be, in your view, Michael, better storytelling all round to make sure that Indigenous people are not seen as the quote unquote victims of development, but rather proponents, participants, champions?
A very good question. There's I would call it a tendency. I don't know if they're trained. I'm not a reporter or journalist, so like I don't know if there's a tendency around human rights framework in their writing or the lens around human rights when it comes to Indigenous stories, but they don't really elevate the Indigenous success around economic projects, large undertakings, major undertakings across Canada. It's usually in trade journals, business articles, but the mainstream reporters and journalists, they frame things up in a way that they'll highlight the like a marginal conflict, but the central story, you know, when it comes to big projects, we're talking about billions of dollars across Canada, coast to coast. You know, the real estate development that's happening in Vancouver, led by Indigenous on their own reserve lands north of Vancouver, to the taking of, you know, the major fishery operations in the East Coast and everything in between, and so telling a story as an Indigenous proponent really changes the relationship with all the stakeholders within that ecosystem, whether that's with the regulators, that's with the other industry proponents, even with your own members. So, your members of your own community is very key in reinforcing the support, that they're giving to that project, what the benefits are, the derivative benefits associated with that, but also it changed the relationship with NGOs, environmental groups. Suddenly what used to be, quote, natural allies with NGOs and environmental groups, and now they're becoming proponents. Suddenly they're taking a distant view of Indigenous proponents in Canada. So it's very, very interesting how the dynamic in communications and relationships when Indigenous people become proponents in this country.
Gotcha. Geoff, you might be interested to know a couple of people have put some comments in the chat. Sue says, it will always be Sky Dome to me. I think Sue speaks for many of us. And then here's something from Jeff Kay. He spells his last name Keay. I remember Jeff well. He used to be a spokesperson for the CBC, and he also worked as a street reporter for Global News around the same time I was a CBC News reporter. And Jeff writes here, as a fresh-faced reporter at Global News, I stood on a pile of dirt inside the under construction Sky Dome. The site manager said, quote, you're standing exactly where the pitcher's mound will be. That must have been a moment. Geoff, can you share a story with us about that building going up and maybe a similar moment you had as it was happening?
Well, listen, not directly because I was in Calgary at the time, and I moved back to Ontario on May 31st, and it opened on June the 4th, and I was there to accept all the credit and all the plaudits. I was a great communicator in those moments of somebody else's glory. I can tell you though, that point that he makes and how excited he felt about standing where first base was. And this actually, I wanted to say this in response to something Alan said earlier. People love construction and they love the action. They love the semi-danger of construction. A little like it's edgy. And if you bring them right in, and I mean, Alan was talking about bringing them into the story. I'd say, Alan, terrific. Bring them right into the Sky Dome. Say, this is where the pitcher's mound is going to be. You're now standing on, and the pitcher's mound is amazingly close to the home plate. When you stand there, you say, I don't want to pitch to these hitters. You can put yourself there. If you on Eglinton, to bring up another controversial project, take the people right down into the tunnel. Don't talk about the tunnel. Don't show them pictures of the tunnel. You go, oh, it's too dangerous. We can't take the public down there. Somebody goes, no, take them down. They'll go, oh, I get it. And then they meet the superintendent, and then they meet the project engineer, and they go, that's a real life human being trying to build this thing. Oh my God, how do they ever do it? And then they go home and they say, oh, I don't get it, but I sort of get it. And man, what a day I had. So you can bring people into the experience, both in terms of information, but in terms of physically getting their hands dirty, or in terms of saying, this is, I remember Michael Fox, I was moved by the Indigenous spaces. I'm learning, I'm not pretending I have much knowledge, but we sat in that, I can't remember what the proper name is, but the Justice Circle inside that courthouse, you've probably seen it. I go, okay, I get it now. I kind of understand. I go home and I'm a smarter person and I have I'm part of it now. I'm sort of invested. And construction is, to sum it up, allows you to do that in a way that people find exciting, in a way that some other things may not.
Mm. For what it's worth, I have been underground at the Eglinton LRT. I did go down for a tour. I think it's probably 3 or 4 years ago now. Astonishing. It's just such a feat of engineering miracles, which of course you don't get if you're on the surface. And
Right.
I'm glad they took me down there. That was some smart storytelling at that time.
Yeah, it's
Alan
really
and Jennifer,
cool. And I don't know if we
Jennifer,
remember
go.
too, just to Jeff's point, back when those giant tunnel boring machines went down into the ground, that was turned into a community event. And I mean, it's phenomenal to see just this magnitude of these things that were going under the ground. And I know that there's still lots of work, but it was a great example of getting people excited and engaged. And I think there were Timbits. It was great.
Alan and Jennifer, I'd actually like your view on this next idea that I'm going to ask you to comment on. And I think we're going back, boy, it's probably 30 years ago now, when Simcoe Place was going up in downtown Toronto, and I guess the construction company made a deal with the Globe and Mail that the Globe would put a full-time reporter on telling the story pretty much every day of something that was happening as that building went up. And I think Mary Gooderham was the reporter. And she literally had a piece in the paper, I think just about every day, on whatever was going on that day, putting the building up. Now, of course, that's very cool when something good happens, and it's very dangerous if something bad were to happen. So, Alan first, then Jennifer, what's your advice? That's 30 years ago. What about today, in the advent of social media, where things can be so much fraught? Would you recommend that as an approach today?
Al, you go.
Yeah, I didn't know that. Oh, sorry, Jennifer.
Yeah, no, go.
I didn't know that story. See, that's really interesting. But I think there's a real opportunity there, because having that, it's like a beat reporter. Having a beat reporter, whether it's, when I was in the energy sector, it was so helpful to have a relationship with a reporter who had the context beyond the day-to-day story, because they understood it, and they were able to tell their story to their readers or to their viewers in a way that that added some of that context, because they knew it and they understood it. And I think, to your point, if they're there day to day, the mishaps, things are going to happen. The challenges are going to be there, but that's what helps make a great story. So if they're doing that day to day, then it's within that context of the progress of the project and the challenges. And at the end of that, you've got a great story. The reporter's got a book deal, I'm sure. And I think it really helps. I think it's a really good idea. I think in many ways with social media as well, giving them the tools to do that is really helpful. So you'll see things like, whether it's webcams on projects, so that people can actually tune in and check out what's going on the site, or the time lapses where you can frequently update them, so people can just see, what did happen last week, and in 30 seconds they can see a form go up, or they can see a roof, those sorts of things. I think those are really helpful, and they get people really engaged in it.
Jennifer.
Yeah, I completely agree. That's very brave. I think but to give a reporter and promise that journalist is going to get a little tidbit every single day. So you're going to give some bad. They're going to be there when things don't go well, but you're probably, hopefully, feeding enough good that they're also steady dripping all of the positive and all of the progress and all of those great milestones. So I think you have to be willing to take a little bit of risk, build those relationships. And if you can work with someone who's going to help amplify that story in a positive way and keep people engaged. It's like, I was speaking with someone the other day about, watching The Amazing Race, and people don't watch it because they like where they go. They like it. They watch it because they want to root on the team. And so if you can help people feel like they've got a team that they're rooting on, real people on the ground, as Geoff said, and you can have storytelling help you shape and get people to feel like they're part of this team and they want to see the success. I think that's an amazing tactic. But it just goes to show, I think, if you're thinking about the long term of a project, like really right up and early, and you are willing to connect with your entire team and decide that this is a level of transparency that we are going to commit to, that's a strategic decision to make. And then that commitment to the reporter becomes a tactic. So you got to get that buy-in first. And I think we should be doing that more.
Yeah. It makes me think of the all access type of sports documentaries we're seeing.
Yeah.
It's not like you respect the team any less for seeing all the warts that are behind the scenes and some of those moments that I'm sure they would rather not have fans see, but they're incredibly compelling.
No, in fact, I hate to admit this, but I can't remember which channel did it, but there was a 10-part series on the rebuild of the Montreal Canadiens, which I'm sad to say is going rather well. As a Leaf fan, I say that. And I have to confess that after 65 years of being raised to hate the Montreal Canadiens, you get to the end of that 10-part series, and gosh, you kind of like all the personalities, and you like what they're doing, and you like the fact that they let you see behind the scenes of how the bridge gets built, and it's pretty amazing.
I almost like Matthew Tkachuk at the end of the one.
Almost. Jennifer, let me get you on this as well. We've been talking about sort of multi-billion-dollar projects here so far, but of course, there's a lot of smaller players in this space, anything from schools to nonprofits, local projects. are the principles at stake here and how they tell the story and what kind of audience they can expect to tell it to. Because, of course, we're not talking billions. We might be, in that case, just talking millions or hundreds of thousands. Does it change?
No, I don't think so. And in fact, I have the great privilege of sitting on the board of Michael Garron Hospital, who had just gone through a massive expansion and redevelopment. And they ran into all the same challenges, all the same celebrations. It's on a smaller scale, but in fact, the benefit is great in that the community was so highly engaged, and the elected officials and all of the stakeholders and all of the people who work in a hospital who have to suffer through, whether it's a hospital or a school or other more local infrastructure. All of the people, these are places where you have to keep the lights on, you have to keep delivering the service through the build of something like that. There's a lot of communications and engagement that needs to happen. The upside is that the benefit, the value, the outcomes are a little easier to explain, and because they're so local and people can see the possibility and really understand what they get out of it. We're going to have a new hospital wing. We're going to have a new school where my kids can go, and they're going to have access to better tools and rooms and facilities. And so the benefits can be a lot clearer, but it doesn't mean you don't run into a lot of the same challenges that you do with something a lot bigger.
Geoff, did you ever have a situation where you were very transparent about the way something was going, and you thought in the final analysis it probably wasn't a smart thing to be that transparent? We probably should have held our cards a little closer to the vest.
Let me tell you a story about Michael Garron Hospital. We were the builder there. You'll all remember, because it was got big media coverage, that about halfway through, I'm not saying we would have done it differently, but it is a story about direct and honest comms maybe gone bad. And in fact, I'll take all the advice I can get from all of you. But anyway, there were nooses discovered on that job site. They were hung off scissorless. They were directly aimed at two Black tradespeople. They were hung by none of these were our employees, but we were the general contractor on the site. As it turns out, we found out later there were other nooses popping up on other construction sites in Toronto, and most of the other firms cut the nooses down and threw them in the garbage and said, nothing to see here. We didn't do that. We said, we've got a problem here, and we're going to face it. If there's racism on our sites, if there's racism in this industry, we're going to talk about it. We're going to deal with it. I can point to some heroes. The unions were terrific in helping us to face this and to find the perpetrators and do education programs, that kind of thing. Daniels Corporation is another great corporate citizen on that front. However, we were known for a long time thereafter as the racist contractor, because we said, yeah, there's a problem here and it's on our site and we acknowledge it. And we've talked here about whether that was really such a brilliant thing to do, because we took a much worse black eye probably than we would have if we just said nothing to see here. Now, the flip side of that is we went to our Black employees here, and I learned a lot in the weeks that followed, but we let them fashion our policies and our response and what we do and how we communicate. I didn't decide, they did. And it turned out to be not so great for EllisDon's short-term reputation. I mean, IO called us and said, what the hell, guys? So it wasn't good there. It turned out to be very good inside EllisDon, I believe. So anyway, there's one way to go. Did we do the right thing, or should we have run and hit? I still don't know the answer.
Well, I was going to ask, do you have, with the benefit of all the hindsight you have right now, would you have done anything differently?
No, I would not have done anything differently. Screw it. There's a problem, face it, deal with it, take the black eye and do what you got to do. Because it's a terrible problem, and you don't resolve terrible problems by pretending there's nothing there. And everybody at EllisDon, even though our comms people are probably watching this right now and having a heart attack as I talk about it again, I don't think any of them would do it differently either.
I'd jump in yeah, Geoff, I'd commend you on it, because the courage to do that gave the community an opportunity to speak about it. And I know there were working groups that came out of that, and just a conversation that wouldn't have happened without you doing that, and your team as well. I mean, I was on the phone on some of that issue, and I know how well your team handled it.
I tell you, Alan, you were probably on the phone. We had just a quick story. It was right in the middle of COVID, and we had all the community on a big call, and we got to make the hospital CEO Sarah was there, and the police officer was there, and I was there, and I said, I've never seen anything like this in 30 years of construction, which was true. And one of the local community members, a storekeeper, a Black woman, said to me, if you're unaware of construction, if you've been a leader in this industry for 30 years and you're unaware of anti-Black racism, you must be the most incompetent leader in Toronto. What do? There's 200, you're on Zoom, you're looking at yourself going, oh my God. And I said, I'll give you that. I must be. I mean, what are you going to do? You can't fight that. But so anyway, it was a hell of a moment.
Yeah, I think we all remember that. That was, yeah.
Jennifer, as you think about advice, though, in that case, were the other companies that just simply cut the nooses down, threw them out, and didn't face the issue at all? Would you have advised them that they did the right thing?
Probably not. I mean, I don't want to criticize decisions are made at a moment in time when you're dealing with high profile and very sensitive issues. So you make the decisions you do. But I think, as what Geoff said, if you can stand behind that decision with integrity and, years later look back and say, wouldn't have changed it, then you probably did the right thing. And I think your point about your team knowing that it was the right thing to do and then standing behind you as you help to build the policies and the internal culture that would help to mitigate that in the future. Hopefully, you can't do everything on your own, but it's important. We had an event maybe a month or so ago that was about nuclear and energy. And James Sconiac from Bruce Power, I'm not going to quote him exactly right, but he made a great quote, and I wrote it down because I thought it was powerful, that, at the end of the day, all this building it's a people business. And it's about, really engaging and encouraging the trust and the confidence of the investors. It's about the trust and empowering those who are building with you. And it's about the encouragement and trust from the people who are part of your team, your employees that are part of it, on top of all the communities. And it's all about people communicating, building trust, building relationships, having those relationships be genuine, the Indigenous engagement, the community engagement. And if you forget that, then you're not going to be able to stand behind those decisions 10 years later.
Michael, I'm so glad you put your hand up because I wanted to come to you next and get your view on this. Go ahead.
No, the communications is so key. The consultation requirements for proponents, they always say start early and often and open and honest, and the participation levels is getting earlier as well. It's one thing to communicate, but they actually participate as well. And in some cases, they start at the environmental impact assessment. It's not at the construction stage. They actually start early to build the capacity, the awareness, and the skill sets needed to fully participate if it's approved. And one of the things I discovered with major projects in remote Canada is that we do all kinds of stuff. Like we go on like Indigenous radio shows where they speak in their own languages, like Wawate Radio in Northern Ontario. We block time, do call-in shows, trying to explain what the project is. We do live streaming, targeted with them with simultaneous translation. So you get on the live streaming, and then you got the translators. You can pick which language you want to listen to the thing. We did online digital open houses, etc. But what we focused on, this was the most interesting part, was that we focused on project information, and it's dry. Right? Like big projects, project information is dry. We started to weave the community story with the project information, like because these were community based projects, community driven projects, and our metrics. So project information only, and our metrics are on the website. Hits, which page, which whatever, the metrics around social media that we had, it went through the roof. It spiked. Once our team put together the community story with the project information, and the world wanted to know more about how these projects are going to impact or benefit the communities, it spiked. So like it just, I think it's just human nature, you know, to listen to community narratives than just purely technical project information, because it
Mm.
didn't spike, you know, when it came to the technical aspects of the undertaking.
I think in our remaining moments here, I have a wonderful email here, not email, a message in the chat forum from Dave Bauer. And I want to read this to everybody on this call and then maybe get some feedback from you on his question here. Dave says, I've had the privilege of learning a lot about the quote, build, baby, build philosophy in action. I was the head of comms and change management for some of Canada's largest companies, Amazon, Maple Leaf Foods, and Purolator during their transformations. Sometimes building new facilities means closing legacy ones. What are some of the lessons you've learned to help mitigate the impact on people and communities affected by closures, layoffs, change, and how would you respect their legacy through new investments or local support going forward? Okay, who wants in on that one first? Geoff, you want to take it on?
Listen, I can talk about delivering bad news because I've delivered enough in the this is internal, but it's the same principle. I think in the early 90s, the construction industry kind of collapsed. And so we were laying off people. And and what I learned, I didn't actually do it right the first time. What I learned was do it early, do it once, do it as honestly as you can, and stand up there and take the flack that's coming your way. And will you be respected more after? No, you'll be less disrespected after. So maybe that way. But the only way to deliver bad news is to stand up personally, in person, not in a microphone, but in a room with and just tell the truth, and don't expect anybody to clap when you're done. And to the extent you can mollify it, because your question was talking about what can you do to make it easier by putting up other uh, things. Well, you do that too. You say, this is what we can do. If it's a case of layoffs, you can do more supports, maybe extended payments, severance payments. If it's a building coming down, you can put up memorials or some kind of a thing, or get some feedback from the community as to what they'd like to see, uh, and then do that. It's probably a better idea, thinking aloud, obviously. But anyway, early, honest, and don't expect to be a hero when it's over, because you're not going to be.
Having said that, when you had to do that, did anybody ever come forward afterwards and say something like, I hated the news, but you handled that as well as you could have, something like that?
Yeah, much later. Yes,
Later.
but the truth is, with the passage of time eases it, and then people can see. I had one person say to me, Geoff, it's December the 1st. The people who know they're going to be laid off need to know they're being laid off, and the people who are staying need to know they're staying. So get off your ass and do it. Well, that's pretty good advice, right? Later, people said, yeah, you were right. That was the time to do it. Not at Christmas, not that Christmas they weren't.
Right. Jennifer.
And there's no better way to deliver bad news. I have to agree entirely with Geoff there, and we've had to deliver plenty across lots of projects as well. And I think, do it early and do it with certainty, I would say would be the best advice. And there were some situations where we attempted to provide insight and possible bad news early, not being clear on exactly what might happen in terms of homes and backyards and trees. And I do wonder now in hindsight if maybe sometimes that's too early. If you're not able to answer any of the questions yet, maybe that's too early. So, take your time until you have a better sense of what the implications are. And there may be some that disagree with me, but I know that when you go out and you give bad news without being able to answer the questions related to that bad news, you kind of end up into in quicksand, and that's not great either. So do it early, do it with certainty, and then, it's not going to go over well, but it will go over.
Michael, have you been in this situation? And if so, how'd you handle it?
At a smaller scale, funding didn't get through, right? I think lead with transparency, not to spin it, and be direct about what happened and why it happened. And I think the other is acknowledging the human impact of bad news, that like I think just don't be knowing that it's not technical, but there's emotional relational impact when it comes to bad news. And it's probably, as everybody said, like be as honest as possible, because like the last thing you want is rumors. You know, the more honest you are, the less rumors can start.
Alan, you're batting cleanup here. Finish it off for us.
Well, I've never met a CEO who does this stuff lately, and so there's a lot of thoughtful discussion and planning around these types of decisions. So as much as you can help them reflect that in their communications, then I think that will earn you some grudging respect. Like Geoff says, people aren't going to applaud you, but to understand the thought behind it, the planning, where you're going, those sorts of things I think are important to ensure that people feel that that this was done with thought and care, and not in a dismissive way.
Gotcha. I have time enough left to say that is our time. And I want to thank all of the behind the scenes people that go into making these webinars possible. I thought today's discussion was just wonderfully candid and thoughtful. And I'm so grateful to Geoff Smith, Jennifer Vandevalk, Michael Fox, and Alan Findlay for sharing their wisdom. We, of course, want to thank you for joining us, our audience, for the comments that we got in the chat. That was really terrific. If you missed any of this, Curious Public will be sharing the recording, so keep your eyes on your email inbox. And until next time, we say so long, everybody, and go, Jays, go.